Welcome everyone, my name is Sarah Fuchs and I am a Community Education Specialist at MDA. We are thrilled to have you join us for today's webinar on navigating adolescence with a neuromuscular disease. This learning event is a part of our larger MDA Community Education Program, which focuses on bringing the neuromuscular disease community together around education and resources. Be sure to visit the Community Education section on mda.org for updates on upcoming events. We are recording today's event and it will be posted to our website for on-demand viewing at a later date. Please know that all phone lines have been muted, but you can still ask questions. Feel free to type any questions you have into the chat box during the presentation, and we will have a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. For over 70 years, MDA has led the way in accelerating research, advancing care, and advocating for the support of our families. MDA's mission is to empower people living with muscular dystrophy, ALS, and related neuromuscular diseases to live longer, more independent lives. Our mission comes to life through 4 pillars of care. Throughout our national network of MDA care centers across the U.S., we support individuals and families from day one of their journey. Champion, through our advocacy and education efforts, we empower families with information and resources. Catalyst, through our investments in research, we are furthering advancements in treatment discoveries. And community, through programs like Summer Camp, our Connections program, and our community events, we are helping individuals and families build supportive connections and relationships. If you haven't done so already, we invite you to join the MDA community by registering with us. And I'm very excited to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Natalie Truba. Dr. Truba earned her PhD with emphasis in clinical psychology from Western Michigan University in 2016. Dr. Truba is currently an attending pediatric psychologist at Nationwide Children's Hospital and a clinical assistant professor at The Ohio State University located in Columbus, Ohio. Dr. Truba's primary interests relate to caring for the emotional, cognitive well-being, behavioral health functioning, and familial functioning of children diagnosed with complex medical conditions and rare diseases. We're thrilled to have you here today, Dr. Truba, and now I will turn the time over to you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I'm just going to share my screen. Does that look okay?
Looks good.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much, Sarah, for that introduction. I'm Natalie. I'm a pediatric psychologist at Nationwide Children's in Columbus. I work with a lot of adolescents and young adults and little kids, to be honest, that have neuromuscular disease. And I'm excited to be here today to talk to you all about something that I think is very important that I hope you all find helpful, which is kind of thinking about how do we approach making it through adolescence and preparing ourselves to kind of start to be adults. So I have a few main objectives that I hope to tackle today. I'm going to just broadly sort of review what we mean when we say transition to adulthood, kind of identify some skills and strategies that can be helpful for cultivating and maintaining healthy relationships, identify skills and strategies needed to self-advocate. We're going to talk a lot about self-advocacy today, and just go over some resources that are available online, some podcasts that people might find helpful or might find rich in the sense of having access to things that expand your horizons or thinking about things that maybe you haven't thought about in that way, or access to opportunities that you just didn't know about. So I'm hopeful that we have some good discussion and we can all learn from each other today a bit too. So when we say transition to adulthood, what do we mean, right? Like everybody kind of knows what it means to be an adult, but it's kind of hard to define in a lot of ways because it really does vary by society and by culture. And so in a lot of ways, when you think about what it means to be adult, it's very contextually. So like, what is the environment you're in? What are the things you know? What are the messages you get? And culturally dependent. And so we have to first recognize like we're here in America, United States, and our idea of adulthood means something different than maybe another country, another set of young people transitioning into what it means to be an adult. Um, and it's important because when we think about adult, we think that it's like, oh, you're not an adult, and then you transition, and now you're an adult, and you're done. And that's really just not the case, because how we approach adulthood looks a lot of ways, not only from societal standpoint, but in your own family and in your own immediate environment, right? And so it's really important that we recognize that for ourselves, and we take consideration of what are the messages that we've got about being an adult, what are the beliefs I have about being an adult, what are the things I look around me and I see adults and I'm like, well, they're a functional adult, that's less good adulting, right? And like, how do we understand that for ourselves? Because it'll be different kind of for everybody, but there are some things that are pretty consistent across what it means to be an adult. So the first thing is that being an adult means you're going to continue to experience transitions and changes that facilitate other turning points in personal growth in your life. And so being an adult is not necessarily a phenomenon. You're just all of a sudden have all these skills to make adult decisions for yourself. It means really that there's a legal component here. And so in a lot of ways, we have to recognize that being an adult doesn't mean that you come with all the skills that you're going to need to be the adult you want to be, the adult you need to be, but you are responsible at that time, right? Once you turn 18, if you have capacity to make your own decisions, if you're your own guardian, that now that all of that responsibility of who holds that power for an individual now becomes yours. And that's a big piece of being an adult here in the United States. But the other pieces, right, are how do we adult? The ways that we behave, the ways that we make decisions, the ways we interact with other people in our lives can be challenging if you have a neuromuscular disease because of other aspects of your care that you might need help with. So in addition to that legal component, right, not only are the consequences of your decisions now yours to own, whether they're good consequences or bad, but there's also a lot of social expectations that come to be an adult, right? There's things like getting a job and maintaining employment, or having a sense of purpose, or doing things that matter to you or that are good for the community or good for your immediate community, like your home. There's expectation that you know all of your care information and all your medicines and all the information about yourself to navigate life by yourself. And that's a lot to all of a sudden be kind of given and tasked with once you turn 18. And when we think about transition to adult, we're really thinking that process of transition to adult occurs over many, many, many years, before you're 18 and then after you're 18, right? And so that's why we talk about it so much when we talk about being an adolescent, because that's that time where we're really preparing that initial transition piece into adulthood. So there are a lot of skills you need to adult. I'm not going to cover them all here, as that would be a whole day long presentation. But you do need to have really good knowledge of your medical and your physical needs. One, because every single adult that takes care of themselves need to know this information, but two, because you could really find yourself in a situation where you need to know this information in order to A, keep yourself safe, B, help other people kind of think through what you might need for your care, depending on what medicines you're on or what sort of neuromuscular disease you have. And if you don't know that, and you're, trying to be more independent and you're out and you're doing stuff with people you care about and something happens, that can put you in a lot of danger if you wind up at an adult care center or something and they don't know much about your pediatric neuromuscular disease. And so really having a good understanding of that not only saves you a whole bunch of frustration, but it could really save your life. And so it's really, really important that in your adolescence that you're starting to get comfortable with your medical diagnosis, and how do we talk about this, and what are my medications, and what are my medications for, and how do I renew medications, and who do I call if I have an issue with these things, and really starting to get involved with that process with your parents. And I know you don't want to, and I know it's not fun. I know it's hard on your parents because they'd rather just do it all because it's faster. But if you don't kind of be a part of that, you're not going to know how to do that once the responsibility is yours to own. You also have to have researching skills, right? So you have to be able to find resources for yourself as an adult, and as a late adolescent. The expectation is people are kind of like, yeah, like, what are you doing to kind of help yourself? Like, what's your plan, right? Because when you're younger, people help you with that. They recognize like you're going to need somebody to help you with this. But once you're 18, that magic number hits, people kind of don't do that anymore. And it can be a really big abrupt shift. So we have to know how to find resources, right? We have to know how to look online. We have to know how to look, up in our medical clinics. We have to know who we reach out to help with resources. But it's not just about finding them. We have to know how to vet them, right? So there are a lot of resources out there. There's a lot of stuff online. There's a lot of stuff you might hear from your friends or from your family or whoever. And we have to be able to like take that information and kind of vet it in the sense of, is this helpful information? Is this information that's accurate? Is this information that's coming from a reliable source? And who can I then check information against? Because we don't want to just consume everything and take it as real. We also have to have sort of a critical lens at times to make sure that we're consuming information that is helpful, not harmful, but is also accurate. So we have to not only know how to find resources, we have to know how to determine, is this a good resource, right? And then we have to know how to kind of use those resources, right? To leverage the playing field, to know how to actually get access to the things that you want to get access to. Like, how do we use these resources to help achieve the things I want to achieve? So we have to be able to find them first to be able to do that. And we have to be able to know, are these reliable resources? Then we have to have some social skills, right? Because we have to be able to call people, we have to be able to use resources, right? So if we know where they are and we know how to access them, but we are uncomfortable making phone calls because we're nervous and we're shy, and we need to make a phone call in order for that resource to be helpful, it doesn't really help that we just found it, right? If we're not able actually to access it. And so sometimes it's recognizing, where are the things that I need to work on, right? I'm really socially anxious, I'm shy, I don't like talking on the phone. But talking on the phone will be part of something I have to do for my care and for myself, and in order to get the things I want in life. That's something I should start working on now, right? Many years before I become an adult, so that that's more comfortable for me then. Social skills are also incredibly important for developing and maintaining relationships, keeping people in your life that you want to keep in your life, developing relationships with other people that you don't maybe have the relationship you want with them yet, navigating challenging situations, navigating your family dynamics. Like, social skills are above and beyond just playing and having fun, but also the strategies and the repertoire that we have for hard situations and hard conversations and repairing relationships, right? Like, those things are hard, and those things become much more important as you navigate into adulthood, because there's really risk that individuals that you interact with, even though they might not be your favorite, are people you might still have to interact with kind of on a regular basis. And so developing skills around, how do I kind of navigate or approach more challenging people situations, can be really, really helpful. Then you also have to develop tolerance of other people's perspectives and interests, right? Which is hard to do when maybe you like things really particular, or maybe you have a lot of anxiety, or maybe you're really shy. It can be hard to kind of shift into wanting to take someone else's perspective, or to consider the things that they want to do, especially if it's not something you want to do. But those are really important, and getting comfortable being, tolerating maybe things not always going your way, or maybe things aren't always done how you would want them done, or maybe that game's not played exactly how you want to play it. There's a lot of benefit going into getting comfortable being uncomfortable in those situations. You also have to have a lot of mental and cognitive strategies to help you navigate being an adult, because being an adult's really hard. There are times that are just hard, and you're going to be disappointed, and it's just challenging at times, and sometimes there's not much you can do to change that aspect of it, other than like, how do I react to this, how to respond to this, what do I have control over, so that I can keep going forward and not get stuck in a rough spot. Which means we have to have critical thinking and problem solving skills, and we need to have cognitive flexibility. And these three skills are really important, because critical thinking and problem solving, that's our ability to say, I, within myself, right, or through certain strategies, or in relation to another person who I'm using intentionally to help me sort through my thoughts, I'm able to think about something critically, take multiple perspectives around it, consider it from different vantage points, and identify different ways to problem solve around those factors. That's really important, because it helps you be more cognitively flexible. And having cognitive flexibility is where we're able to cope adaptively, take different approaches for different situations, challenge our own ways of thinking, challenge our ways of behaving, so that we are able to address areas where maybe we're stuck, or there's a barrier, like we're shy, or other things that can help us really kind of not avoid these things, but work through them and get to a place that we're able to function in the ways that we want to function as adults. You have to have good financial literacy skills, right? this is incredibly important. And I think a lot of adults struggle with this, right? Like money is hard, and understanding all the ways money works is really challenging because it's a pretty robust system, our financial systems here in the United States. So you have to understand normal banking, right? And what that means, and how do you set up a bank account, and how do I access a bank account, and what do I need to do to have my own money established? And are there special types of bank accounts? Are there things that I might be able to access because of my medical conditions? Like all of those things are really important to know. And then understanding things like interest rates and loans and other things that you might get to access are really important because those types of things add up. And so having a sense of how am I making decisions for myself from a financial standpoint is helpful to do, but you have to know some things about the financial world in order to do that in a way that's healthy and safe for yourself. There's special disability funds that you might be able to access. There's ways to think about managing your SSI, and how do you balance maybe having some employment with SSI if you're somebody that qualifies for that, and how does that contribute to your well-being and your livelihood in whatever state that you might live in, because all of those resources are state dependent and kind of different. And then we should always, every single person as an adult should be thinking about aging and a plan for aging, because aging creeps up on us, and it's expensive. And thinking and planning for long-term ways to think about how will I use my money, what kind of money might I need to in order to help get the care I need is really, really important. And those are hard conversations to have young, and they're impossible conversations to have if you don't have some sort of financial literacy at a foundational level. And you need to be able to self-advocate. And self-advocacy is absolutely huge. As an adolescent, it's really, really important. It's really important that these are skills that we're developing all the time. But in adulthood, it's incredibly important because when you become an adult, the responsibility at the end of the day is on you. And people will help you. Your parents will help you, your siblings, your friends, your providers, your nursing staff. People want to help. I'm not saying people don't want to help, but people cannot necessarily do things for you anymore like they could in the past. And so the responsibility on who is owning, right? Like knowing the information, making sure things get done, make sure things are followed through, making sure, you have what you need and you're being heard and listened to. That's now on you, not on your parents, right? And they might still fill that role in a lot of ways, right? But people in society, your providers when you're 18, are going to look to you to do that. And advocating and being able to say, actually, no, I don't know if I like that plan, or I don't know if I want to use that medication, or can I talk to you about changing something about my care plan is really, really important, right? Outside of that, advocacy is really important because that is the way that people know how to understand us, how to make sense of the things that we might be trying to communicate or what we need to be successful, and helps them know the things that they don't know. So we're going to talk a lot about self-advocacy over the next several slides because I think self-advocacy is an area within neuromuscular population that I see a lot of kids struggle. With that being said, it's hard for a lot of people to develop good self-advocacy skills because it's a skill set and it can be really challenging. So what is self-advocacy? Self-advocacy is the action of representing yourself or your views or interests. So this is you actively doing something to let people know what you think, what you want, what you need, right? So it's not something you can do in your head. You might do it in your head, but that's not advocating until you do it actively outside of here, and it's communicating in a way where other people around you know what it is you're communicating. They know what your goal is, and you can now have an idea of what you need to tell them or what they can talk to you about how do we actually get there. So it's intentional and it requires effort. It's very effortful, and it has to be very intentional when you're advocating for yourself. It's a skill, right? There's gonna be times you do it really well and times you do it less well. I feel like I advocate for myself very well as an adult, and there are times I do that and I'm like, I think I was very skilled, and there are times I'm like, oh man, I will need to learn from this, and that's okay, right? Like we're winning or we're learning, and self-advocacy is a experience where you will feel as if you're learning a lot because it's really uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to speak up. It's uncomfortable to kind of say, what you need at times, depending on kind of how what's going around or what's going on with that. But like I said, it is your responsibility, right? So let's say, what are the areas that we think about self-advocacy, and we think about where are times that we could practice that maybe we aren't, right? And a common example that gets brought up to me a lot with my patients is, if I go to a restaurant, if I have a neuromuscular disease where I'm in a wheelchair, like a power chair, or if my parents are helping me at all, what often happens is the waitress won't give me a menu. They give everyone else a menu, and they don't give me a menu. And okay, so this is a good opportunity to self-advocate, right? Because we have a choice here, right? We could say, I'm just going to get mad and be like, blah, 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 this person, like, they're such a jerk. I can't believe they would treat me like this, right? Which is fair. We could say, oh, they didn't give me a menu. I'm going to say something about that, right? And we could say, like, hey, can I have a menu? Right? That's self-advocacy. You say, like, oh, hey, can I have a menu? Right? Because you're saying, I want a menu. I don't come have a menu. We could do it in a mean way and be like, are you an idiot? You didn't give me a menu, right? But that's not going to probably go super well or be something that feels good for either of you down the road, right? Or we could do nothing. So we have a lot of choices in that moment, right? The second one is adaptive self-advocacy. We're saying, oh, I recognize a problem. I'm going to point this out in a gentle way, but tell you exactly what I need and move on, right? So you didn't give me a menu. Can you please give me a menu? I'd like to look at my own menu. Thank you, right? Another time might be if you're in a medical room, you're with your family, physician's talking to your parent, and they're talking about you and your medical care, and you maybe have your own thought, or you maybe have something that you want to say, or something you want to share, or something you want them to know, or maybe something you feel like they're not fully understanding or it's not accurate. That's a good time to practice self-advocacy and say, oh, can I share something? Actually, I don't know if that's 100% accurate. It's kind of like this. That is another form of self-advocacy, right? There's big forms of self-advocacy, right? Like we see on the news and we see politically, but in your life, self-advocacy can look in those areas and those times where you're questioning, should I say something, should I not say something? Those are good opportunities to say, now is an opportunity for me to practice self-advocacy. If I speak up for myself, if I bring this into space, if I say something, okay? So think about self-advocacy in those ways, not big ways, but in small ways. Where are the times that I don't normally advocate for myself? I'm not telling people what it is I need or what I want in that moment, or what's not working, that maybe I could start to practice this, because it's actually a really good thing to practice and people will be appreciative. And I know if you're worried, like, I don't know if I want to speak up, I don't want people to get mad at me. Oftentimes, by and large, more than not, most people are going to feel bad that they didn't fully understand or appreciate what it was that you needed, right, before you told them. And this is a good opportunity for you to say, well, of course not, you're not a mind reader, right? And this is a good reminder for all of us that we should check in with people, because we're not mind readers, but we have to communicate to people because people aren't mind readers, right? And that's often where we get in more problems, right? Is if we don't advocate and people think one thing, but we need another thing, that can cause a lot of strain. So how do you start to self-advocate, right? Well, first things first, you have to know what you want to advocate around. Okay, so what matters to you, or what is it that you want to change, or what is it that you want in life? What is it you want to achieve, right? Because sometimes we have to understand, like, you might be like, I want to go to college, right? Like that's my goal. But I cannot have anybody except my mom help me in the bathroom, right? And if you need help in the bathroom and you want to go to college and you need your mom to do it, that might not be compatible, right? So there might be times that to get to our goals, we might have to do other work, right? Well, can we start maybe working with somebody like me, a psychologist or a therapist, that might be able to help us work on anxiety with our caregivers so that we can develop comfort with our caregivers or who's given us care at home, so that we can eventually get to our goal of wanting to go to college in a way that maybe is out of state or wherever it is you want to go, and I'm comfortable using the supports available to me in that area, and I can do that thing now. So sometimes starting to advocate for yourself or develop a roadmap helps you identify what are the other things I need to kind of work through, or I need to kind of get kind of in place in order for me to get the next step, which all these steps are needed to get to that goal of going to college, right? And if we don't do any of these things, that time is going to come to go to college and we're not going to be ready, right? Because these things don't happen overnight. They happen over time, okay? And so it's really important that we're being honest with ourselves as we're in our later adolescence and going into young adulthood about these things and like what's really needed in order for us individuals, because everybody's needs are different, for you as an individual to do the things in life that you want to do. What are you willing to tolerate to get what you want, right? So in my example of the menu, are you willing to tolerate being a little bit uncomfortable for a couple seconds or a minute, right? Like speaking up, like you're going to feel uncomfortable, and that will go away pretty quickly, right? But you will notice it. Doesn't feel great to like call somebody out like that, right? And you're not really calling them out by saying, can I also have a menu? But it will feel like that. You're bringing attention to something that's already kind of embarrassing, right? Or it doesn't feel good. It might not be embarrassing, but it doesn't feel good. And so that's a big ask. It doesn't seem like a big ask, but it can be, right? If that's something you're willing to tolerate, that's a good thing to know for yourself. So you can say, is this worth speaking up? Am I willing to tolerate the distress I might feel from speaking up? Okay. Sometimes it's like, ooh, I don't know if I like that, but I'm going to be like way more upset all night if I get treated like I can't read and make decisions for myself. So I'd rather feel minorly distressed now than feel bad about myself for 6, 7, 8 hours tonight. That might be another way to think about it. So understanding like what can you tolerate and what are you willing to tolerate is really important. My other example of like going to college, right, and needing maybe help in the bathroom, if going to college is that important, is it worth experiencing that distress around developing some skills to manage anxiety with strangers as you get used to them helping you in the bathroom? Is that worth that distress for temporary period of time worth it so that you can do this thing that you really want to do of going to college? So understanding what it is that you're willing to tolerate. And if you're like, no, I can never have somebody I don't know help me in the bathroom, then maybe we re-talk about like, okay, so you want to go to college. There's a lot of ways to go to college. Do we need to think about a way to think about going to college in your residential area so that your parents can still be involved in your care? And that might not be ideal, maybe not what you want, right? But it's what we're able to tolerate. Okay. And we have to be able to have those conversations with ourselves and with our families so that we are able to work on a plan, right, to be successful so that we can get that menu if we need it, or we can, go to college if that's what we want to do. What do you need to help get what you want, right? Like you might need therapy, right? To work on anxiety or to work on, developing some assertive skills or whatever it is that might be needed that might help get past whatever current barriers in the way of being able to advocate more comfortably. Do you need a lot of money? Is it a financial situation? Do you need aides or nursing supports? Is it an infrastructure situation? Do you need a new chair? Do you need a ramp in this place? Like, what is it that you need to be successful? So if you want to go to an improv class in, this building and they don't have a ramp, but you really, really want to go, right? Like the first thing is like, well, I need to find some resources and I need to know who to work with in this building so that I can make a case that they need to put a ramp in to be ADA compliant so that I can go to this class I want to go to. And is that awesome? No, right? And it will help have better luck with navigating the spaces that you want access in, okay? Because I know for sure that not doing anything about those things, right, and not saying anything and hoping that just somebody else will do it is not going to work, right? And so knowing what you need to get what you want is really important, because if you don't know what you need, you don't know how to look up resources, then you don't know how to advocate for getting those resources put in place so that you can access them. Who else needs to be involved? Do your friends need to be involved? Do your parents need to be involved? Do you have a sibling needs to be involved? Do you need nurses involved, or does your medical team? Who needs to be involved for things to be successful? You want to travel? Awesome. Who needs to be involved for you to travel if you want to travel, right? Do you have a power chair that can make travel hard? But there's ways to do that across state lines, especially with meds or other things that can get very challenging. But there's ways to do that. It just takes planning and time. And so you might need, a specialized travel agent, or you might need to be working with your social worker at your neuromuscular clinic to help you sort of figure out, how do I travel in a way that's safe for me? So again, it's not that the barriers make it, or like reducing these barriers or developing these skills make it easier, right? It's not like all of a sudden the challenges of having a neuromuscular disease go away. However, they do become easier to navigate and to approach in the sense of, I know how I can develop a pathway to people in my life to do these things I want to do, whether it's get the menus I want, go to college, travel, whatever it is. Okay. You also need to know your strengths and your weaknesses. Okay, so this takes some self-reflection, and your strengths and weaknesses will change over time. They change over context, they change depending on what you're doing. right? So something that might be a strength in one situation is not a strength in another situation, right? So being funny and, really extroverted and kind of hyper and, silly is great when you're with your friends. Everybody loves it, crack everybody up. It's a good time. In school, though, might make you more likely to get in trouble, right? Or in the job, it makes it maybe more likely that you get reprimanded. So great strength, right? But if we don't regulate it, we don't kind of check ourselves, then we're not necessarily we can kind of shoot ourselves in the foot. So you got to know your strengths and know when they're strengths and maybe when they're weaknesses, because it's not a all or nothing. But having a good sense of this for yourself is really important because you need to leverage your strengths. I cannot emphasize this enough. I feel a lot of people downplay their strengths and they're not able to step outside of like how they understand their strengths to recognize how does this strength, can I apply it kind of novelly or in a way I haven't thought of to kind of meet this need or get to a place I want to get to. So if you know that you have a certain strength in writing, right? If you're a really good writer, you're really good at organizing your thoughts. But we're not using writing right now to try to think about coordinating our care. We're not reaching out for resources. We're not using that as a way to sort of communicate our needs. Then we're losing out on that strength, right? And so do we normally use writing in those ways? No, we do not. However, it's a strength for you. And if that is a better way for you to get the things that you need in life because it allows people to better understand you, we want to tap into the strength, right? And we want to have a way to know, okay, I need to do it this way because I know I'll be more effective if I do it this way than that way, even if it's a little untraditional or really different than how others do it. And we want to work on those areas of weakness, right? So the natural urge as a human, right, is to avoid things that we're not good at and avoid things that make us uncomfortable. So if you're really shy, it's really easy to avoid asking that waiter for another menu, right? But that doesn't necessarily do us any favors. So when we have a weakness, right, and being shy is not a weakness, that's probably not the best word I should have used, but something that maybe we're working on developing or strengthening, is that we want to recognize that and we want to say, okay, I'm going to intentionally choose to not avoid this because I know if I avoid this, I'm just going to make it worse. And it's something I want to work on, right? So if you're shy, don't talk to people less. Use it as an opportunity to practice starting a conversation or joining a conversation or responding to in a way that facilitates maybe a shift in the conversation or whatever it is, the skill that you want to work on. Use those opportunities when you're uncomfortable to do that. And I know it's easier to say than to do, right? I totally get that. But I do know that the only way to improve these things is to do. And I do know that even if you're anxious and you're shy and it's scary to do, that you can do it and you can get through it and it will be okay. We also need to know how to talk about our neuromuscular disease. So the first thing is, what's the function of this for you? And function is really important because it's like, what's the point of this? Why are we doing this? What do I hope to achieve from this, right? And this is going to be different for everybody, right? But developing a way that you're comfortable talking about your neuromuscular disease is really, really important. One for you and one for other people. And if this hasn't been part of something that you've done before, it might take a little bit of like getting used to, right? And some practice to kind of develop your words and find your language and be prepared for the type of questions that people might ask you, right? Because people are curious and people that care about you are genuinely want to know things about you. And if this is a big piece about you, they likely will ask questions. And so having a way that you're comfortable to respond to things and know information that you want people can be really helpful. So this isn't something you do regularly now. I would encourage you to start to think about, like, if I was to talk to people about my neuromuscular disease, like, what would I want them to know? What is important for them to know? And why would I want to be telling them? At the end of the day, though, it's your body, and nobody deserves to know anything about your body unless you want them to once you're an adult. Okay, that's the thing about being an adult. You get to own those things. Okay, but helping people understand your situation is going to go a long way in improving the quality of your interpersonal relationships, because people just don't know what they don't know, right? And people make a lot of inaccurate, bad, biased, prejudiced judgments, right? And I am very hopeful that we are changing the tides with our youth, and we're getting to more of a conversation of everybody advocating for everybody in the community. We're not there yet though, and so it's it it's such an unfair burden with the person as a person with a disease to have to carry that burden of educating everybody and advocating and making sure people are thinking about you in a space, and that will change. And it will change the more that you are educating your friends and your peers and your parents, and they're educating their friends and peers and colleagues and workmates. And the more that we're educating, the more that we're speaking up, and the more that we're talking about this, the more people are aware of it. And once people have awareness of something, they're much more likely to recognize things in the community that they didn't notice before, right? And speak up about them. So a lot of times, like, people just don't know what they don't know. Like, I can't tell you guys how many times I meet other psychologists or other physicians or other providers, and a lot of people don't know why, if you're in the parking lot in handicap parking, where you park your vans, that the one side where it's all blocked off with the lines, that's for the doors to go down, so you can get up with your power chair. And a lot of people just, they don't think of that. They're like, I don't know why these spots are so big. It's not something they think about. And you tell them, they're like, oh, I've never thought about that. So sometimes it's so simple and silly things that you all will be like, why, you've never thought about this? But I promise, like, the education can be so helpful because it helps people see the world in a different way, right? And you can go to the same like restaurant for 20 years every day and not notice something until someone points it out. And so think about it more like that, like, not like this is an unfair burden, I shouldn't have to carry this. I agree, it shouldn't fall on the burden with the individual that is navigating this life, and it does. And so look at that as an opportunity, not that people are trying to be mean, they're not being bullies, they're not trying to be ignorant, they just really genuinely don't know what they don't know. And teaching and providing the education around simple things or things to you that seem very silly can be really, really powerful to them because they just haven't thought about a lot of ways of living with a physical disability. So how do we think about self-advocacy, thinking about how do we bring in what we want, what we need, what's important to us into the spectrum of our relationships? So we have family relationships, which are our primary relationship. It's different than any other relationship you'll ever have in your life because you're born into your family. You don't choose them, right? A lot of other relationships you choose. Your family is your family for your life, right? Unless something happens and you get a new family, but that family's still there, right? And in your genetics and in your memories. Your sibling relationships are relationships that are very unique. You have them forever. They're super special. Cousins can be really important. You have aunts, you have uncles. So family relationships can be really vast, right? They can be complicated because you know each other for so long and people are comfortable in different ways in families. But there's a lot of strain in a family system too. So there's a lot of challenges when it comes to thinking about how do I think about myself as independently as possible if I need help with physical things. That becomes a really challenging thing to navigate in a family, and it can really lead to some dynamics where you as a child, regardless of how old you are, and if you're over 18 and your parent, you don't feel like you have a parent adult child relationship. You still feel like you're being treated like a child, and parents still feel like they need to treat like a child, right? Even though they don't. And so it's a switch for both of you, right? In a lot of ways, when you're transitioning and you have any sort of complex medical condition, especially any that impact your physical, like, your muscle weakness and your muscle strength, there's a lot that go into parents, into your caregivers and their adjustment process, into you transitioning into becoming an adult as well. And being aware of that is really important because you're going through your own transition, and your parents and caregivers, they're going through their own transition, and those things are happening at the same time. And it can be a lot for both of you to kind of sit with that and support each other through that, because it's hard. And so being able to talk with them adaptively about navigating this space is really important. Otherwise, you start fighting, you get into weird dynamics where you don't feel like you're being listened to, or your parents are infantilizing you in ways that are unhelpful, or it leads to a lot of, disruptions, like, arguments, or people not wanting to talk to each other about certain things because it just leads to a meltdown. And so, again, coming back to that, how do we advocate? How do we like what are the areas of our really well developed social skills and what are the areas of improvement so that we can maybe advocate differently or better, right? Because sometimes we might be advocating in a way that's not well received by others. So like yelling at people is a way of advocating, but it's usually not well received by other people, or being really demanding if you need things really particular is a way of advocating, but it's not as well received by others, right? So there's ways that are to advocate that are adaptive, and there's ways to advocate that are less adaptive. And we want to be in that adaptive space. We want to be doing this in a way that feels good to other people, it feels good to us, and it helps us get our needs met, right? Because these are relationships that we have to continue to have with many of these people, especially those in our family, right? When do you start working on this and how? So this is really family specific. My recommendation is as early as possible. So, thinking about when 12 or 13, starting to bring more into the medical space, getting more comfortable talking about things with their doctor, getting more comfortable knowing about their meds, starting to, 15, 16, starting to make calls to schedule their doctor's appointments and those types of things. So thinking about it and like, how does, for me as an individual, right, who you are, and my parents, like, how do we think about like a time frame for starting to like transition each piece? And the more gradual and the more thought out, the better off you'll be, right? Because then you kind of say like, okay, this 6 months we're working on this, the next 6 months we're working on this, the next 6 months we're working on this, and all of a sudden it's been 3 or 4 years, and you've kind of at least chipped away at some of the things that are helpful for you to start practicing on, right? So start early, go gradual, build upon it. Siblings, I just always want to make a plug because, like I was saying earlier, siblings are just a really unique and special relationship. They're probably the people that know you the best, especially as you're growing up, and they're the people that are with you forever. That you know them longer than your spouses, your kids, your friends. They're with you through the times with your own parents as they age that are harder or challenging, or other family members, and they are affected too. They go through this journey with you if they're, if they don't have their own neuromuscular disease, they go through this with you in a different way. And I think oftentimes we don't think about siblings in some of these spaces where when you're trying to problem solve or think about like, how can I do this? And often siblings know you and are willing to share feedback in a way that a lot of other people don't. And that can be really helpful from bringing them in as like a sibling friend standpoint, like to generate ideas or to think about, okay, like what are ways that we could be creative to try to tackle a solution here. And so I wanted to just mention siblings, one, because I do think that they go under-recognized in this group, but two, because I think that they have a lot of valuable insights for you all, for your parents and your family as a unit that I don't always think are brought in. And I just wanted to make sure that I encourage you all to do that. So peer relationships, this is a big one. And I'm gonna spend a little bit of time talking about what it means to like develop a friendship and a relationship, because I think it's really important in relation to a lot of the individuals I see for outpatient therapy. This is a area where we really struggle when we get out of high school, and I'm going to talk about why I think that is. So what goes into developing and maintaining a friendship, right? Like it's you don't often think about it, okay? But when we think about friendship, the ways that people develop friendship are through proximity. How close are you, right? Are we in the same space? Are we in a space together? Time, how much time you spend together, and shared experiences, the things you do together, right? So when you're in elementary school and middle school and high school, proximity is taken care of for you, right? Because everybody's in the same building, you all go to the same space, you live in a neighborhood, or you live in the country, but then you go to school, you're on the bus, like everybody's in the same proximity. You have time, right? Because you're done all on the same schedule all day, every day. You have, you're with your classmates, you're with your friends. There's only so many activities you could kind of select from to do. And you're gonna do the things you like to do with them, right? You like to game, you like to joke around, you like, get outside, whatever it is you like to do. And that's how we develop friendships. Well, as an adult, it's really different because you have to like intentionally seek these things out, right? Or, you just end up being friends with only work people. And that maybe doesn't always feel good. So, because we're different, right? You act different at work than you act with your friends at times. And so having space that's separate from some of your other spaces is really important. And so as an adult, you have to like intentionally cultivate and find space to develop friends. Like it's an act of development. It just doesn't happen anymore. And so a lot of people if you choose not to go to college or you choose not to have a job, it can be really hard to keep those social relationships going because friendships change and evolve. They change and evolve for a lot of reasons. One, there's a huge contextual change in when you transition out of high school because that proximity isn't there anymore and that time isn't there anymore because people's lives start to take different shapes. And what often happens is there's a lot less socialization visits outside of those spaces, like where you're going and you're still with people in a proximity standpoint. And so then you have to be very intentional, right? In scheduling and planning and keeping those things going because they don't just happen anymore like they used to happen in high school. There's another transitions that happen in that early adult with just sort of life experiences, right? Depending on, if you have, if you go away to college and all your friends stay local, right? Like that's going to change the dynamic of your relationship. If you're, you go right into working and they go into college, or you go to college and they go right into working, that's going to change the dynamic of your relationship. If you stay or do you move in with your friends? Do you live independently? Do you stay with your parents? Do they move away? Or are they moving out of state? So there's a lot of things that kind of start to happen in that early adult period where people are, meeting their significant others. They might be starting families. And once some, people start families, like that changes a whole bunch for them, including how they can kind of be friends to people. And I'm not as young as y'all, but I'm not super old. And I have a lot of friends who all just started having families. And I have noticed it's changed the dynamic of our friendship. We can't hang out the same way, right? Because they have really little kids. And I know eventually we'll get back to, having a similar friendship that we used to have. We travel and we do a lot of stuff like that. It's just temporary that we can't, right? But for the time being, how we hang out and how we experience each other's friends is very different than what we're used to, right? And that's okay. That's part of life and accommodating or being flexible, like I was talking about. But you're going to notice that. You're going to notice like things feel different once you're an adult out of high school with regards to how it feels to make friends, to keep friends, to cultivate friendships, just solely because you're no longer in a brick and mortar building with other people all the time, where all of that is kind of set up for you in a lot of ways, right? It's, not set up, nobody's like forcing you to be friends with people, but you're exposed and you're around the same people kind of all the time for many, many years, which allows for friendships and other things to be developed naturally. Romantic relationships are similar to friendships, but with a whole bunch of added social risk, right? Because of the nature of rejection. And so similar to friendships, right? It's intention, it takes effort, it's about proximity and sharing time and having shared experiences and intentionally cultivating a romantic side to that relationship, which means you have to put yourself out there and communicate and express your feelings of romantic interest, which then makes you vulnerable to feeling painful emotions, right? And it's worth it. Like it's a scary risk, but when it doesn't work out or you do get rejected, you're like, oh gosh, that sucks, right? And it just hurts. But when it works out, it's so great, right? And that's why people keep doing it, right? They keep trying to make those connections and meeting people because having romantic connection and having, partnership is just so meaningful to humans and so valuable, and it just does such good things to us as, emotional social beings. So I say this because it's even harder to cultivate and develop romantic relationships once you're an adult outside of sort of high school in those areas if you have a more limited social circle. Okay. So this is why finding activities, finding ways to be in the community, advocating for access to space is so important because that is where people are and the people you want to meet and the people you want to develop relationships and the people you're interested in outside of just the people you've kind of been forced to be friends with or who you've been able to choose from to be friends with, right? Which is your high school and your elementary school kids that you've grown up with. But as you get older, right, like really thinking about where do I want to kind of explore the community to try to find people that I feel like would get me, that I would get and I could enjoy spending time with the hopes of cultivating some friendships and finding people that you might have interest in romantically to further cultivate a potential relationship if those are things you're interested in. What about relationships with challenging and difficult people? So this is a challenging part, right? Because the reasons why people act challenging or people engage in bullying or other behaviors like that are so multifaceted. it's hard to, give a blanket, like just do this one thing and you'll be good. But at the end of the day, we know that these situations are part of life. Does that make it okay? Does that mean that they should not be addressed and that we should not strive to eradicate bullying and other sort of um, relational aggression experiences out of society? Absolutely, we should. And that's just not how the world works. So you will have periods of times, people in your life that are less than ideal to work with, less than ideal to interact with, and that don't treat you in a way that you love, right? And that does suck. It sucks for anybody that's experienced it. But we cannot control other people. And I wish that there was a way to say, well, we're just make them not do that, right? And that is a good goal. Self-advocate, talk to your teacher, talk to your parents, talk to your school officials, like be loud about it, like make sure that people are aware if you're getting bullied or at work or at school or something like that. But at the end of the day, like we cannot control other people. We cannot tell somebody how to talk. We can't tell people, what they can or can't say to us, or how, how they act maybe around us. But we can certainly implement boundaries, right? And set limits around what we will tolerate people to treat us and what we will do when these things are happening. So having boundaries, communicating them to people is super, super important, because at the end of the day, we cannot control other people. We can only control how we react and we respond to them. So if somebody's bullying you, right, I would love it if somebody's able to say, hey, dude, don't do that. And they're like, oh my gosh, okay, I will not do that anymore, right? If it was that easy and that's what worked, then we would not have bullying, okay? That is likely not going to be how it goes. However, if you are getting bullied or you're experiencing things in the workplace or something that feels more relational aggression, having good communication, so say, hey, I actually really don't like when you talk to me like that. I don't like when you treat me like that. I don't like X. I'm going to ask you to stop. And if not, I'm going to walk away. I'm going to wheel away. I'm going to report you to HR. I'm going to file a complaint with Mrs. So and so or the school, right? Or something like that. And you're just saying, like, this is what I don't like. This is what I would like you to do different. And this is what I'm going to do if you don't, right? And that is where we have control, saying, this is how I'm allowing myself to be treated. This is what I'm asking you to treat me. And if not, this is how I'm going to handle that. Okay. And does that always get rid of it? No, it does not. Right. It might be something you have to do over and over, something you might have to do multiple times, something may have to do in multiple ways. But it is the best process to help facilitate changing and shaping interactional patterns, like with other people, who can be challenging, in hopes of improving them and sort of reducing and eliminating some of those variables that kind of maintain people treating you like that. Okay. And again, I'm not going to go through all the potential variables that could be, one, for the sake of time, but two, because it's incredibly multifaceted about why people are motivated to do anything they're motivated to do, particularly if it makes somebody else feel bad. So I'm just going to encourage you all to really think, where can I exercise control? How can I choose how I respond in this moment to set my own boundaries and to take action against encroachments or people that don't adhere to my boundaries? What am I going to do about that? And who maybe needs to help me with that? Okay. All right. So I'm going to go into resources since we're getting to a good time. These are online resources. I haven't gone through every single component of every single one of these online resources, so full caveat. But I want to start by just going through some of the bigger ones, and I'm hoping some of you already know about, like Rare Connect, which is a platform that just connects patients with rare diseases. MDA Connect for young adults is great. They have a lot of young adult programs, but they also have some video game groups and other things for younger kids and older kids and younger adults, that to try to bring that community in and find people that you can connect with and communicate with and build social relationships with. USA.gov is a good one. They just have a lot of information for people with disabilities and their families. Meetup.com I put on here because I am a big fan of Meetup.com. I move a lot, but it's designed and meant to be a community connection space. And so if you go to Meetup.com, you can kind of like put anything in you want, your location, and you know, if you're into like basket weaving, you can find other people that are into basket weaving and you can build your community. If you're into like underwater basket weaving, okay, there's probably some people into that. If you're into, you know, a very specific video game, or you want to play chess or poker or whatever it is, meetup.com, it's got you. It's a place that brings people together to build communities based on their shared interest, right? Even if it's a weird interest. Like I found a kite fighting group. I didn't even know kite fighting existed, but apparently it does. And that's a whole group on meetup.com. So you can find weird interests that you might be into that other people also share, and you're like, okay, I found some of my people. And they might not be romantic relationships or great friendships or your best friend, but they're people that you enjoy doing things with, right? And something that can be really powerful from a community sort of development of sense of belonging standpoint. Dating sites, I'm not going to go over those because they're pretty common and a lot of people know about them, but I'm going to talk about some more specific disability focused things at the end here. But I do think there's a lot of benefit from using people meeting up spaces to try to make friends once you're an adult, as long as you do that safely and you have a good sense of sort of your parameters for what is you're looking for. Because you can find friendships, romantic relationships, people to do activities with across different types of sites. And so not all of them need to be used for dating. A lot of can also be used to try to cultivate shared interest and really working to build your social community of people you choose, right? That you genuinely like and want to spend time with, not just people that you're exposed to. And you know, you're like, oh, I don't really like these 5 guys, but they're the only people I can choose to be friends with because I go to this school. So I guess I'll pick Johnny because he's the least worst, right? Once you're an adult, you can kind of say, I don't actually have to be friends with any of you guys because I don't like you. I can choose my friends, and I'm going to choose to be friends with these basket weaving people because they have a good time. Creative Parent Network is great. They have a ton of good resources on talking about diagnosis and navigating the medical community and talking about SSI and all those things across states and federally that you might want information on or might want to share information with others. They're a good one to tap into. They have a lot of materials and resources that you can distribute. Okay, so there's some really cool podcasts. I haven't listened to every single one of these people's sort of podcasts, but I'm a fan of them. So the Accessibility Stall is a podcast that's really focused on casual conversations between these 2 friends who have kind of different views of their disability and how they think about disability or having a physical disability. And they just talk about everyday topics, everyday interactions, and they use a lot of humor. And it's good to hear people talk from different lenses. And so I like these podcasts because they bring disability into a space that allows you philosophically to think about from a sense of identity and what does disability mean? What does disability mean to the community? What are the things happening in the spaces that I want to be a part of that I might be able to bring back to my local area that I didn't even know about, right? Because these are not, you know, things that I'm listening to on my current podcast. The Disability Visibility podcast is widely popular. They do like really in-depth interviews and discussions with different disability community leaders and advocates in the community, and really focusing on like activism and culture and the intersectionality of having a physical disability along with other individual variabilities like your gender and your religion and your sexuality and other things like that. Barrier Free Futures is a podcast where Rob Kafta does interviews with different disability activists and people in the community about their experiences, their life experiences. That kind of share stories. They reflect on past times when, you know, they've experienced things, and it can be pretty rich. And Down to the Struts is a look at accessibility design, both physical and culture. So design of spaces, design of equipment, design of material, design of things that you might use to be physically independent, that from a lot of different types of people and a lot of different lenses within the disability community. Power Not Pity is a podcast that really focuses on exploring the full range of disability, particularly of those people with disabilities and who are people of color. And so it really looks at the intersectionality of physical disability and race and cultural sort of ethnic ethnicity factors. So that's a pretty cool podcast. Included, the disability equity podcast is solid. This is really looking at how do we fight ableist stereotypes and other ways that ableism sort of is a barrier to the disability community moving forward and advocating in the same ways or the same spaces or achieving the same level of supports that is needed in the community. Pigeonhole focuses on solely really just not being pigeonholed essentially, but looking at disability as an identity factor and what does that mean to you or mean to individual people. And Exceptional Leaders is pretty cool, and I wanted to include this one. It's kind of unique, but really looks at entrepreneurs and services who are dedicated to helping people with disabilities. So not everybody that comes into this space has a disability on this podcast, but they're working closely with people in the physical disability community around like how do we do things, right? So teachers and authors and fashion designers and filmmakers like sharing experiences of advocating and bringing in physical disability into these spaces, right? So thinking about fashion design as it relates to people that maybe have G-tubes or using wheelchairs or have trachs, or thinking about film and art and media and how do we make things more accessible so that our brothers and sisters with physical disabilities who are amazing actors and actresses and musicians and artists have the same access to be able to show their art and show their talent in the same ways. And so I encourage people to check that one out. And then last but not least, I wanted to include a few sex and disability podcasts. So if you're, under 18, these are definitely things that you need to talk to your parents about and have your parents kind of go through and double check and see through it from your own family's values, kind of what makes sense for a family to kind of talk about or know about. And if you're over 18, these are ones that I just encourage you to kind of look at and go through to see, are there materials part of them that kind of that hit you, that strike you. So KPBS does a podcast by Miss Lolly called Everybody's Doing It. And she focuses just a lot on sort of different sort of topics of sexuality and of sexual experience and romantic relationships and seeing yourself as a sexual being, and a lot of conversations around sexuality and disability in that way. And Disability After Dark by Andrew Garuza is awesome. It's a great podcast. I highly recommend it. It's a very frank conversations, and there's a lot of explicit language. So again, this is one that if you're an adult, check it out. And if you're not an adult, please talk to your parents about this podcast if you're interested, to have them go through and see what they might be comfortable with you exposing yourself to. But these are frank conversations about sex and relationships and other aspects of the disability experience. And he does a really good job of kind of just getting down to the raw, and he's very direct and real, and it just leads to some really cool, humorous, rich conversation and shared experience. And then last but not least, Dating, Relationships, and Disability, which is hosted by Kathy O'Connell through radiantdisabilities.com. This platform mostly focused on actually concrete ways of thinking and doing and structuring mindset to help kind of navigate through experiences of developing romantic relationships and more intimate sort of relationships with people. And so sort of talking about what kind of tricks do we maybe have or tips do we have for dating if, depending on what equipment I might use for my health. How do I approach issues of sexual ableism in the dating space? How do I recognize my power to be attractive and my sense of sexuality as a human, right? Given the messages I maybe have gotten or the things that I kind of believe myself. And how do what goes into having a happy relationship or a healthy relationship? So I encourage people to check this one out too. It's there's a lot of good resources that are just concrete and specific to ways to think or ways to talk to yourself or to tell yourself or to share and ways to do that can be helpful when you're newly into that dating space. Or if you've been in it for a while, to be honest, they're all helpful. All right, thank you so much. And I look forward to getting some questions and learning from you guys and chatting a bit.
Thank you so much, Dr. Truba. Just for everyone else, we did put those resources that she was talking about in the chat. So if you wanted to check those out, they are there. But we will send out the recording at the end in a couple of weeks so that you can review those as well. So now we're going to open it up for questions. We did have some questions that were submitted prior to when you were registering, and then it looks like we may have also had a few that came up in the chat. So Dr. Truba, I'm just going to jump right into it. What are a patient's rights to know the true forecast of their muscular dystrophy diagnosis? So let's say a member of the family doesn't want to talk to them about those details. What is the patient's rights?
That is a tricky question to answer, to be honest. That's a tricky question to answer. So patient rights, there's a legality aspect to who holds information before somebody is 18. And from a legal standpoint, at least, here in the state of Ohio, and I, would check with your state laws around holding medical information and how that works. But here in Ohio, parents hold that right, and so the legal right trumps a patient right to know information in a lot of ways, especially if it's not a diagnosis that could pose harm to the community, like something communicable. That being said, I feel strongly that being transparent and developmentally and in a developmentally way and sharing information honestly is the best kind of approach to navigating and talking about neuromuscular disease. One, because not talking about it doesn't make it not happen, and not talking about it in that sense is really only going to cause confusion, and you really run the risk of developing a sense from your child that they can't trust you because you've withheld this large amount of information from them, and the things that you've probably told them that to like minimize or to distract from the questions that they may have after neuromuscular visits or whatever, likely result in them not like you really run the risk of them really feeling like they can't trust you in the future when they ask you a question and you tell them something. They're going to question, is this accurate? Are you telling me everything? Because for a long time you didn't, and that's a real risk. And so I think, when children are old enough, developmentally developed enough that they can, cope with the information that about their medical disease that is being shared at that time. So I don't think that withholding information from kids is the best approach. And I can't answer it beyond that because the rights question that's tricky when it comes to the law.
No, I totally understand. I think that's valuable insight. Thank you. So somebody asked about resources for getting a driver's license and adapting a car, and I'm going to take that a step further. So you had talked earlier about even the anxiety about maybe becoming more independent. So I'm not sure if you wanted to start with, resources for maybe finding a therapist or talking to, resources in your community about even getting that process started. Any resources that related to driving and getting that level of independence?
Yeah, I'm so glad somebody brought that up, and I'm like kicking myself for not thinking about that. So whoever you are, thank you for being awesome. So I'm gonna address the car thing first. So again, state dependent, it really depends where you're at. Like here in Ohio, the Ohio State University has a adaptive driving program, and that is where our youth and young adults where we refer somewhere in your state, a large academic medical center in some degree, or through your Department of Disability Services should be able to help link you to adaptive driving programs. And once you get that referral, usually has to come from maybe one of your physicians, like your physical medicine doc or your neurologist or somebody like that. And they make a referral to an adaptive driving program, and then you kind of get started through them. And they do everything from driver's ed to, modifying cars to teaching you how to use your modified car and all of those things. So it's kind of like a full driving education package, but then also vehicle sort of modification need that can go along with it. So an adaptive driving program would be my recommendation. And you could either reach out to large academic medical centers in your area, Google it, like adaptive driving programs near me, or reach out to your disability services in your area or your neuromuscular clinic. And then for therapy, there's a lot of ways to get therapy nowadays. So, whether that's telehealth or whether that's in person, all of it is good. I'm a big fan of CBT type therapies. I find them to be most helpful and effective, but there are people that definitely respond and benefit from other modalities of therapy. But CBT is going to be probably one of the most common ones that you'd hit. And CBT stands for cognitive behavior therapy, which is a whole bunch of different types of therapies, all aimed at helping address ways of thinking, ways of perceiving, the way your mind works, in addition to how we behave in order to manage our emotions and our experiences in life, to manage mental health or other distressing things. And that can occur in a lot of ways. There's a lot of different types of CBT therapies. But I encourage a CBT approach. And again, reach out to your primary care doc if you can't find any other resources in the area. But Psychology Today has all of the providers listed. In there, you can type your area code in, and you can kind of look at, I want somebody that does CBT. I want them to know medical complexity, and it'll kind of it'll create a list for you that has all the names of therapists in your area, or psychologists or social workers who do therapy in your area. The other way would be like a good kind of Google search for like pediatric psychologists in your area, or child clinical psychologists that work with medical complexities, and you might be able to cultivate some providers that way too.
Great, thank you. And then just to piggyback off of that and talk about some of MDA's resources, my colleague did link our MDA Access Workshop for Mental Health in the chat box, and that also goes over different types of therapy. Dr. Truba was talking about CBT, talks about what all of the different types of therapies are, the different specialties that exist, and it also has resources for finding mental health help. So I encourage you to look at that. And then I also wanted to let you know that the MDA Resource Center is also available to help with anything related to finding resources in your local area. So thank you for that. Now, the next question is about sexuality. So it's asking if about sexuality and decision making. So especially if an individual has a comorbid diagnosis, an executive function disorder, developmental and intellectual disability, ADHD, what advice can you give for talking about the consequences of actions, and positive and negative, and anything that you can talk about related to that?
Good questions, guys. That's a hard to answer without having more information about developmental capacity and level and that, but I'll do my best. So depending on developmentally where your kiddo is at, there are a lot of good resources for teaching about healthy sexuality and how do we think about our bodies and our bodies in relation to other people and those things, starting for like younger kids on. And so the first, my gut knee jerk is, depending on how old your kiddo is and when you want to start that, kind of like looking into materials around, maybe not necessarily related to sex, but thinking about like body autonomy and how do we think about our body as like something that we own, that we don't have to just let anybody do whatever they want. Or how do we think about decision making in the sense of when you feel pressured. Like there are a lot of good kids books on those types of processes that aren't related to sexuality but that go involved to when you're in those situations, and the things you want your youth to know around consent and around other things. And so I would actually think about starting that in a way that you're just talking about that as a general life conceptual things I want my kids to know. And once they're older, kind of pulling that into sexuality as well, because then you kind of have the foundation built around like what are these concepts independent of sexuality, because those concepts are true regardless of sexuality. Um, the other place that I'm a big fan of working on is like naturalistically, and so I always encourage families to consider or to think about like, you know, those normal social situations when that we don't think much about, that maybe actually are really good opportunities for us to practice and model with our kids. Can we think about body autonomy and consent and asking permission? And that might be times like you go to a family function and you have family members, older families who like demand your kids give them hugs or give them kisses. That's a good opportunity to say like, oh, well, you know, like, let's like, do you want to do that? Like, you don't want to do that? Are you willing to do so? And so instead of just expecting or pushing kids, like they just do it because somebody wants them to, that's more of a conversation that you're having with them around like, well, do you want a hug? Do you want to hug them? Or would you more comfortable giving a high five? And letting kids sort of have some choice in how they allow people to like touch them when they're little is really important. And if we don't send that message, like the message a lot of times kids get now, right, is that you just, you know, like, well, if someone wants to hug you, just let them. Or if they, you know, your uncle or your aunt wants a kiss, like you do it because you don't want to hurt their feelings. And I don't know if that's the best messaging. So I think the other place to really analyze and think hard on is, there are times in your everyday life where there are opportunities to step back and say like, oh, like this should be your choice. Is there ways to practice consent and, you know, body autonomy and asking here, and not in a necessarily high stakes sexual situation, but in an everyday, like we're going to Christmas situation, or we're going to, you know, it's Ramadan, we're doing Ramadan things at night, or whatever it is that whatever your life is, wherever you contact people where that those social societal expectations are more intact or more in, you know, in play. I think that those are good opportunities to start those conversations with kids. So, you know, thinking about developmentally, how do I bring this in a way that we can have a foundation of everybody should get consent and we shouldn't do XYZ to people, and this that can be built upon when it comes to things like, you know, navigating a breakup or navigating sex or navigating XYZ, but then also letting and modeling in real time to your kids to send those messages that like, actually, like, we don't just hug people because they want us to hug them, right? Or we don't, like, you can make your choice and say like, actually, I don't want to hug right now, I'll give you a high five, and that's okay.
Great, thank you. Yes, I know hugs or high fives is a common term in my house. So I think that's great. Thank you for discussing that. So the last question we have here is about planning for aging for limited lifetime expectancy, and what is the best approach for that?
That's a good question. I guess it depends on disease process and like how limited life expectancy we're talking. I think so. The tricky part, if as a caregiver or parent, is if you have a child with a neuromuscular disease where the life expectancy is a little bit longer, and or treatments are now kind of really getting out there that are making that a lot longer, it makes it really hard to predict because we just don't know, right? Like we have a time frame and we're like, okay, life expectancy is typically in this window, but now that window is kind of shattered because we've had new treatments, we have new things that are helpful, and that's awesome, but now it makes it harder for us to predict and plan down the road. So that's hard for me to answer, and we're struggling with that a bit ourselves. But uh, the elephant is that as you all are aging, as the parents are aging, so your family planning times two. Your family planning for yourselves as adults as you're aging, but then also in the context of my child and their care, and as they're aging and what they're going to need, and that is a financial endeavor, one, and needs to be considered because it might change how you manage your own finances and how you manage your own retirement plans and those things. But two, like having that conversation and bringing that into space with your child as early as possible and as comfortable, you know, not when they're really young, not, you know, not when it's, you know, we're in, you know, imminent sort of end of life situation. Um, is really important, but hard to do when you don't necessarily know where those goalposts are moving because of new treatments and other things. So I think introduce it slow, gradual, and build over time in a way that you're talking about for yourselves. Like, we want to normalize the conversation. So that's where we want to start. We want to normalize the conversation. We want to normalize the conversation by ourselves as adults sharing, like, so I did my will today. And even if you didn't, right, you're just like bringing it in as a story. Or your dad and I were talking, or your mom and I were talking, and we got, or so-and-so was sick, and it made us think, what would we want? And you're just talking, and you're bringing that in and normalizing like the conversation around thinking about as we age, or if we're really sick, or if we find ourselves in a situation where we can't make decisions, or people couldn't talk to us to ask us what we wanted, like what are some things that we should know about each other, right? And it's a conversation, and normalizing within your family is a good way to do that. One, because it is helpful for you guys to talk about that, even for yourselves, like talking about that and having plans and having the people in your family know what your wishes are is really important, especially if you don't have, like power of attorneys and all those things filled out. But allows you to, over time, to kind of bring in more, you up the ante, so to say, as your kids are kind of developing and aging. You're building that foundation of, talking about things that are hard, or things that we maybe don't want to talk about, which is, someone we love a lot, maybe dying. But that gets easier the more we do it, and we know we have plans and these things. And now it's like, nobody wants anyone to die, but at least I know what you want. And I know that I wouldn't be doing things that maybe you would be mad at me about, or maybe that you would perceive as causing more suffering. And so I think it's really important to talk about and to plan around, but it's hard to do when the landscape for what expectancy could look like is likely going to change even from now into 5 years. And so I'd say plan for a longer time than a shorter time, which is also challenging, in particular when you think about, like, who do I want to help care for my child if they have a lot of dependent needs, right? Are those conversations that you're having in your family? Because if not, like, that can get really dicey as parents age, and you have a youth that, is aging themselves, and they're not sure who's going to take care of them or who they want to take care of them. And then siblings feel a lot of guilt, like, well, I have my own family I'm taking care of, and Ollie's like, I don't know if I can, bring that in. And because we've never talked about it, no one's ever planned, we haven't been planning on it, right? Now it feels like all this feels really bad. And so talk about it early. Like, they're hard conversations. They're going to be harder conversations to do in 15 years than they will be now, to do gradually over time. So I wish I had a more explicit, straightforward answer for you on that one, but that's a hard one to answer, just because everybody's really different in that way.
Thank you so much. I think you gave a great jumping off point, and for people to consider in their individual situations. So thank you again. And if everyone doesn't mind just sticking with me for just a minute, I would just like to wrap it up here. If you are new to MDA and have been diagnosed with a neuromuscular disease under MDA's umbrella, or if you or a loved one has been diagnosed, we encourage you to stay engaged with us at MDA. You can do this by visiting mda.org/join and completing a short form. Joining is free, and it will keep you up to date on the latest research, educational programs, and supports. We would love to hear your comments about this webinar. Once you leave the webinar, a webpage will automatically pop up with a short survey about today's webinar. Completing the survey will provide us with important insight as we plan for future educational programs. And if anyone has any questions after this webinar, please feel free to email them to mdaengage@mdausa.org, and we will follow up with you. So this concludes today's webinar. Thank you again, Dr. Truba, for your time, and thank you to everyone who attended, and we hope to see you again soon.